What a dump! Elizabeth Taylor spits the line with venom, and with it, she redefined how raw and brutal cinema could be. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf wasn't just a play turned into a movie. It was a nuclear explosion in Hollywood's safe, glossy landscape. Behind the bitter dialogue and broken bottles, chaos brewed. Directors fought studios, actors tore each other apart, and the censors panicked. Today we're peeling back the curtain on 20 dark, weird, and shocking facts about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a secret buried so deep, even many film scholars missed it. Stay with me. This is going to get vicious. Elizabeth Taylor packed on weight. Deliberately. Elizabeth Taylor didn't want to look glamorous for Martha. Instead, she purposely gained nearly 30 pounds, chain-smoked, and wore deliberately frumpy clothes. Hollywood expected its leading ladies to stay flawless, but Taylor defied them, declaring, "Martha is a mess, and so am I." The shocking transformation horrified fans who expected the Cleopatra beauty, but it gave her Oscar-winning grit. On set, Taylor reveled in the grotesque realism, smearing makeup and letting her hair go wild. Critics couldn't believe the contrast from her glossy MGM image. She sacrificed vanity for truth, something unheard of at the time. The result? A character so raw and terrifying that audiences squirmed in their seats. Taylor shattered the illusion of old Hollywood glamour, and Martha became her greatest weapon. Richard Burton and Taylor's real fights bled into the film. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor weren't just playing George and Martha, they were George and Martha. Their marriage at the time was infamous for screaming matches, booze, and betrayal. Director Mike Nichols exploited this volatility, encouraging them to pour their private rage into the roles. Crew members reported nights when Taylor and Burton's off-camera fights seemed indistinguishable from the script. Even Burton admitted, "We were exorcising demons." What audiences didn't know was that every venomous barb wasn't just acting, it was therapy, performance, and punishment rolled into one. Watching them tear each other apart felt uncomfortably real because it was. The blurred line between character and couple made the film both electrifying and dangerous. The studio nearly banned the film for language. Before 1966, Hollywood dialogue tiptoed around censorship. Then came Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, with words like "screw you," "hump the hostess," and "god damn." The censors erupted. The production code office initially refused to approve the film at all, calling it indecent. Warner Brothers fought back, banking on the movie's prestige to push limits. Eventually, the code relented, but only after heated debate. The battle over Woolf's dialogue became a turning point. It essentially shattered the Hays Code and ushered in the modern rating system. Audiences sat stunned, hearing language never before allowed on American screens. It wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural rebellion, daring Hollywood to finally grow up. Sandy Dennis wasn't the first choice, and she nearly quit. Sandy Dennis, who played the fragile honey, seemed born for the role. But she wasn't the studio's first choice. They wanted bigger names, actresses who could pull box office numbers. When Dennis was cast, she struggled with nerves. She hated the long takes, the suffocating close-ups, and Nichols' demands for precision. At one point, she considered walking off the set. Yet her fragility on-screen wasn't just acting, it was her real terror captured on celluloid. Nichols later admitted her discomfort only made Honey more authentic. Dennis won an Oscar for the role, proving sometimes the most tortured performances come from actors who don't even want to be there. The shoot took a brutal toll on everyone. The movie feels claustrophobic, and so was its production. Filming stretched past schedule, ballooning costs, and exhausting the cast. The entire film is essentially 4 people screaming in a single house, shot under blinding hot lights. Tempers flared. Elizabeth Taylor drank heavily between takes, while Burton retreated into alcohol and brooding silences. George Segal admitted he often left set emotionally wrecked, saying, "We were bruised inside and out." Nichols pushed his actors until they broke, then pushed further. The atmosphere was so intense that crew members described it as psychological trench warfare. By the time the shoot wrapped, everyone was drained, but the raw exhaustion bled into the final product, making the screen ache with real human damage. Mike Nichols nearly got fired on his first film. Mike Nichols, a stage director making his feature debut, terrified Warner Brothers executives. He insisted on shooting long takes with complex blocking, which slowed production. Studio bosses panicked, demanding he speed things up or be replaced. Nichols refused, saying, "If you want quick, get another director." His defiance nearly cost him the job. But Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Hollywood's ultimate power couple, threatened to walk if Nichols was fired. Their loyalty saved him. Ironically, the same artistic stubbornness that worried Warner Brothers became Nichols's signature style, earning him praise as a visionary. What began as near disaster became the foundation of his legendary career. Nichols's gamble proved that sometimes breaking rules is the only way to make history. Elizabeth Taylor collapsed. During filming, the emotional strain wasn't just psychological, it turned physical. Elizabeth Taylor, already battling health problems and heavy drinking, collapsed during one intense scene. Crew members rushed to her side, fearing she'd had a heart attack. Production halted as doctors tended to her. Taylor later brushed it off, joking, she was tougher than Martha. But insiders say Nichols was shaken, worried his star might literally break under the weight of the role. Despite the scare, Taylor returned to set, pushing herself harder than ever. The collapse became a dark metaphor. The film was so brutal, it could kill you. Instead, Taylor endured, transforming her pain into performance and securing her second Oscar. George Segal's casting infuriated. Elizabeth Taylor wielded enormous power, and she wasn't shy about using it. When Warner Brothers cast George Segal as Nick, Taylor exploded. She reportedly wanted a more famous actor. Robert Redford's name was floated. But Nichols stuck to his instincts, insisting Segal's boyish charm was perfect for the role. Taylor grudgingly relented, but often mocked Segal during rehearsals, making him feel inferior. Yet this humiliation worked in Nichols' favor. Segal's character is belittled by Martha throughout the film. The on-set tension made the dynamic sharper, more real. In the end, Segal's quiet intensity held its own against Burton and Taylor's volcanic energy. Still, his casting remained a sore point in Taylor's mind, a reminder she didn't always get her way. Cinematography was a battlefield cinematographer. Haskell Wexler fought with Nichols almost daily. Nichols wanted a stage-like intimacy, while Wexler demanded more cinematic movement. Their clashes turned vicious. At one point, Wexler threatened to quit, but the battle produced innovation. They shot with stark black and white, even though color-dominated 1960s cinema. The contrast sharpened the film's cruelty, turning wrinkles, sweat, and tears into weapons. Wexler used shadow to make the house feel like a prison, trapping the characters in their own venom. It wasn't theater on film, it was theater weaponized through cinematography. The film later won an Oscar for Best Cinematography, proving that sometimes creative warfare delivers unforgettable results. What began as discord ended in cinematic brilliance. The censors created the rating system because of it. By 1966, the production code was already wobbling, but Virginia Woolf smashed it completely. Its explicit language and adult themes forced Hollywood to admit the code was dead. Jack Valenti, head of the Motion Picture Association of America, created a new system, what we now know as movie ratings, GPGRX. Virginia Woolf became the first American film released under the new guidelines, carrying the warning for mature audiences only. Without this film, there might never have been an R rating. So next time you watch a modern blockbuster filled with adult dialogue, thank Elizabeth and Richard's drunken chaos. And speaking of chaos, go ahead and like and subscribe, because the next 10 facts are about to get even darker. Nichols forced dozens of grueling rehearsals. Mike Nichols ran his set like a boot camp. Before cameras even rolled, he demanded weeks of a rehearsal, treating the film more like a stage production. Actors repeated scenes endlessly until exhaustion stripped away their polish. Elizabeth Taylor grew frustrated, Richard Burton seethed, and George Segal quietly complained, but Nichols pressed on. He wanted spontaneity, born from fatigue, not rehearsed perfection. By the time filming began, the cast was raw and unguarded, like boxers staggering into the ring. This method created volcanic eruptions on screen. What audiences didn't know was that those blazing fights were the product of calculated torment. Nichols broke his actors down to build them back up, proving that sometimes the ugliest process births the most beautiful art. The makeup department rebelled. Elizabeth Taylor, only 34 at the time, needed to look like a worn-out middle-aged Martha. The makeup team initially resisted. Why make the world's most glamorous star look frumpy? Taylor herself demanded it, pushing artists to give her graying hair, tired eyes, and bloated features. At first, the department refused, fearing backlash from Warner Brothers for ruining their star. Taylor overruled them, even smearing her lipstick and eyeliner during takes to enhance Martha's chaos. The rebellion shocked Hollywood. Here was a leading lady choosing ugliness over beauty. The transformation was so effective that audiences gasped in theaters. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, Taylor fought her own crew to shed the last remnants of her goddess image. Alcohol was practically another character. The movie drips with alcohol, and so did the set. Richard Burton, a notorious drinker, downed liquor between takes. Elizabeth Taylor matched him, blurring performance and reality. George Segal recalled, "Half the time I didn't know if they were acting or fighting drunk." Nichols allowed it, reasoning that the haze of intoxication added authenticity, but it also risked disaster, missed lines, slurred dialogue, and tempers flaring beyond control. Some nights filming ended early because Burton was simply too far gone. Still, the alcohol fueled the toxic energy, creating a dangerous realism no sober performance could mimic. The line between performance and addiction vanished, making the film feel less like fiction and more like a captured breakdown. The movie was shot in sequence. Unusual for Hollywood, Nichols insisted on shooting the film in chronological order. He believed the escalating tension needed to feel real, not manufactured in the editing room. This meant the cast endured the story's spiral of destruction exactly as the audience would. By the time cameras reached the devastating climax, the actors were emotionally drained, mirroring their characters. It wasn't acting by the end, it was lived experience. Shooting in sequence was costly and logistically difficult, but Nichols fought for it. The decision paid off, giving the final act its crushing weight. What audiences didn't know, when Taylor whispered the last lines, she wasn't reciting, she was barely holding herself together after months of emotional warfare. The set became a pressure cooker. The entire movie unfolds in a single house, and Nichols recreated that claustrophobic space down to the smallest detail. But filming in one location for months turned the set into a prison. Crew members compared it to being trapped inside a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. The air grew heavy, the walls suffocating. Arguments off-camera echoed the ones on. Everyone, from cast to lighting crew, felt the psychological chokehold. Nichols refused to ease the tension, insisting the confinement fed the authenticity. And it did. The house became a character itself, pressing down on George, Martha, Nick, and Honey until they cracked. What audiences didn't realize was that they weren't just watching entrapment, they were witnessing it unfold for real. The Oscar sweep was nearly unprecedented. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Shocked the Academy. It was nominated in every single eligible category, 13 in total. That feat has almost never been matched. The film walked away with 5 Oscars, including Best Actress for Taylor and Best Supporting Actress for Sandy Dennis. But here's the kicker. Richard Burton, who many felt gave the performance of his career, lost Best Actor to Paul Scofield in A Man for All Seasons. The snub haunted Burton for the rest of his life. For Taylor, the win cemented her as one of the bravest actresses of her generation. For Burton, it was another reminder of how his personal demons overshadowed his genius. The sweep proved the Academy couldn't ignore Woolf's brutality, even if it rattled their safe traditions. Jack Warner feared it would ruin his studio. Jack Warner, head of Warner Brothers, nearly pulled the plug. He thought the profanity, the ugliness, and the hostility would drive audiences away. He reportedly shouted, "No one wants to watch people scream at each other for 2 hours." But Taylor and Burton's star power kept the project alive. Warner reluctantly agreed, convinced the movie would flop. Instead, it became one of the biggest critical hits of the decade, making Warner eat his words. Ironically, the same film he thought would sink his studio helped save it, proving audiences were ready for a new kind of cinema, raw, unpolished, and unflinchingly human. The fear that Woolf would be Warner's disaster turned into a triumph that redefined Hollywood's future. The church condemned the film. Religious leaders weren't just offended, they launched campaigns against the movie. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave Virginia Woolf its harshest rating, declaring it morally offensive. Sermons railed against Elizabeth Taylor's vulgarity and Richard Burton's drunken rants. Some theaters refused to show the film at all, but censorship only fueled curiosity. Young audiences flocked to see what all the fuss was about. The church's outrage unintentionally helped turn Woolf into a cultural phenomenon. The condemnation proved the old moral guard was losing its grip on America. What audiences didn't realize, while priests thundered from pulpits, Warner Brothers quietly laughed all the way to the bank, cashing in on forbidden fruit. The playwright loathed it. At first, Edward Albee, who wrote the original stage play, wasn't thrilled with Hollywood adapting his work. He feared the censors would neuter his dialogue and the actors would miss the play's essence. When he first saw rough cuts, he complained the performances were too theatrical. But as the film gained acclaim, Albee softened, eventually admitting Nichols had captured the spirit of his play in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Still, he remained prickly about details, reminding critics that the play was meant for stage, not screen. The irony? Without the film, Albee's play might have remained a niche theater piece. Instead, the movie immortalized it worldwide. What began as disdain ended in reluctant respect. The ending was changed. Slightly. In Albee's play, the ending is ambiguous, leaving audiences shattered. Nichols tweaked it, softening Martha's final moments to make them more sympathetic. Elizabeth Taylor delivered the closing lines with a mix of exhaustion and tenderness, hinting at a fragile humanity beneath Martha's cruelty. Some critics accused Nichols of going too easy, but audiences wept. That shift, subtle as it was, helped the film resonate far beyond the stage. It wasn't just venom and hate, it was also about the desperate need for connection, even when love rots. What audiences didn't know, that one adjustment turned the story from a bleak play into an immortal film, giving it the emotional punch to endure. Bonus fact, Taylor and Burton tried to sabotage each other. Here's the wildest secret. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton reportedly played psychological games to throw each other off during filming. Burton would whisper insults before takes, hoping to rattle her. Taylor retaliated by improvising vicious lines not in the script, daring him to break. Their rivalry fueled the ferocity audiences saw on screen. Nichols encouraged it, letting their marriage unravel in front of the cameras. What no one realized was that the greatest acting of their careers wasn't scripted. It was combat. Their performances were born out of sabotage, competition, and a love so toxic it scorched the screen. The result wasn't just cinema, It was war captured on film. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf wasn't just a movie, it was a detonation that blew apart the boundaries of Hollywood. It changed censorship forever, destroyed illusions of stardom, and forced audiences to confront ugliness they'd never seen on screen. Its legacy? Proof that truth, even when brutal, can be unforgettable. If you learned something new, hit like, smash subscribe, and tell us what's your favorite moment of cinematic chaos.